Okay, today we are looking at 5.2. Photosynthesis stores energy in organic compounds, and we will look at light-dependent reactions today. So firstly, just a little bit of intro. Much of the glucose that's produced by plants gets converted to cellulose or fiber and other structural tissues. Glucose may also be converted to other sugars, as well as storage forms of carbohydrates like starches. Sugars produced by photosynthesis are involved in the synthesis of other essential cellular substances, such as amino acids, which are needed to make proteins. Other organisms depend on the molecules, tissues, and substances that plants synthesize for their own use. All right, so here it's just showing that plants produce structural and metabolic substances for their own use. And humans have developed numerous technologies to take advantage of the properties of these plant substances. All right, so lots of things that plants can make, like poison, fragrance, proteins, oils and lipids, cellulose, sucrose, starch, and other organic molecules. How do plants use it? And then what do people use it for? The process of photosynthesis, which you have probably seen this equation many times. It's carbon dioxide plus water plus the energy produces glucose and oxygen. So that's a summary equation for photosynthesis. It shows the starting reactants are carbon dioxide and water. The end products are glucose and oxygen. But there's much more that occurs between what appears on the left side and the right side of the equation. Photo means light, refers to the reactions that capture light energy. Synthesis refers to the reactions that produce carbohydrate. And then the two sets of reactions that make up photosynthesis are called the light-dependent reactions and the light-independent reactions. Okay, so the light-dependent reactions, this is where solar energy is trapped and used to generate two high-energy compounds. The first one is ATP, and the second one is NADPH, which is reduced nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate, and it has a large amount of reducing power. The light-independent reactions, basically it takes the energy of ATP and the reducing power of NADPH, and then those are used to reduce carbon dioxide to make glucose. Glucose can then be converted into starch for storage. All right, so we still need the products from the light-dependent reactions to do the light-independent reactions. Okay, so we're going to start looking at the light-dependent reactions of photosynthesis. So the pigments within the thylakoid membranes, they're going to absorb the light energy. A photosynthetic pigment will trap the light energy and it's going to pass it on to other chemicals, which will use the energy to synthesize high energy compounds. So chlorophyll, which is green, it's the main type of photosynthetic pigment in plants. Each photosynthetic pigment absorbs light of different colors. So having a variety of pigments enables a plant to use a greater percentage of the sun's light. So for example, in these diagrams, in this one here, you shine a white light through a prism and it refracts and we can see the visible light spectrum. So here, when you look at an object, you see the colors that were not absorbed by the object. So leaves appear green because chlorophyll molecules in leaf cells, they reflect green and yellow wavelengths of light. They are absorbing the other wavelengths. So red and blue get absorbed, green and yellow are getting reflected. That's why we see the leaves as green. Here in this diagram, there's three photosynthetic pigments shown. There's chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, and there's beta carotene. And this absorbance spectrum for the three photosynthetic pigments shows that each pigment absorbs a different combination of light colors. Here in picture C, we can see during spring and summer months, chlorophyll masks the presence of carotenoids and other plant pigments in leaves. Cooler temperatures in autumn cause leaves to stop making chlorophyll. And then with that green pigment no longer present to reflect green light to our eyes, the colors that are reflected by carotenoids and other plant pigments become visible. And then we start seeing like reds and oranges and yellows. And here we're looking at a graph. We have the rate of oxygen production and then wavelength. This is showing the rate at which oxygen is produced during photosynthesis. The shape of the graph generally mirrors the shape of the graph in this B graph that we had seen. Okay, so light absorbance, kind of like just what we talked about. The flattened thylakoids in the chloroplasts of plant cells are stacked into those columns called grana, and then surrounding the thylakoids and filling the interior of the chloroplast is that fluid substance called stroma, and that's where the chemical reactions that synthesize carbohydrates take place. Chlorophyll is the light capturing pigment that absorbs all wavelengths of light except for green and some yellow. So again, these two diagrams are showing the same thing. When you look at any object, you are seeing the colors that were not absorbed. We're seeing the colors that get reflected. The absorbance spectrum for 3 photosynthetic pigments here: chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, and beta carotene. Each pigment absorbs a different combination of colors of light. All right, let's just do some questions here. Why do plants appear green? It's again because of chlorophyll. It reflects the wavelength of light that produces green light and kind of some yellow. It absorbs the other wavelengths. What's the difference between chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, and beta carotene? So looking at those graphs, chlorophyll A absorbs more indigo, violet, and red wavelengths. Chlorophyll B absorbs more blue and orange wavelengths. Beta carotene absorbs violet, indigo, blue, and green wavelengths, but not yellow, orange, or red wavelengths. And again, you can see that from the graph. Question 3, why would it be an advantage for a plant to have several pigments in a chloroplast? Again, it's to use a greater percentage of the sun's light, being able to absorb all those different wavelengths. Okay, at what wavelength of light is oxygen production the lowest and then the highest? So you've got to look again at this diagram here, diagram D, and we can see that oxygen production was the lowest between 500 and 550 nanometers, or green light wavelength, and oxygen production is highest between 400 and 475 nanometers, which is the indigo blue light wavelengths. All right, so again, you can see that in this graph. All right, next we're going to look at the path of electrons in the light-dependent reactions. So chlorophyll, like we talked about, is bound to the membranes of the thylakoids inside the chloroplast. And then chlorophyll and other pigments are arranged in the thylakoid membranes in clusters called photosystems. And chloroplast of plants and algae have 2 photosystems. There's a photosystem 1, which is PS1, and there's photosystem 2, which is PS2. And each photosystem is made up of pigment molecules that include a dozen or more chlorophyll molecules, a few carotenoid molecules, and a molecule that accepts electrons. All the pigment molecules in each photosystem can absorb light energy of various wavelengths. they always pass the energy along to one specialized electron-accepting chlorophyll A molecule called the reaction center. Then, when a reaction center has received the energy passed on to it, an electron in the reaction center gets excited. This electron is raised to a higher energy level, and the electron is then passed to an electron-accepting molecule. Since this electron acceptor has received an electron, it becomes reduced, so it is at a high energy level. All right, so we're going to take a look at what happens after the energized electron reaches the electron acceptor. So number one, or step one, right here is step one in the diagram. So when the electron leaves the reaction center in photosystem 2, so we're looking at photosystem 2 first, it just happens to be the first one that was discovered, so that's why photosystem 2 happens first. So the electron leaves the reaction center in photosystem 2, there's the electron, and it's going to go to the electron acceptor, so here. The reaction center is missing an electron. So this electron is replaced by a water molecule. And a water molecule is split in a series of reactions. So we see the water molecule splitting right here that release electrons, hydrogen ions, and oxygen atoms. The oxygen that's released by plants comes from these water splitting reactions. So right here. All right, so step two, which is right here. From the electron acceptor, the energized electron gets transferred along a series of electron-carrying molecules. These molecules are called the electron transport system. So right here, this is the electron transport system. And with each transfer along the electron transport system, the energy releases a small amount of energy. So you can see here, this arrow is showing that there's energy for the light independent reactions. So it's used to push hydrogen ions from the stroma across the thylakoid membrane and into the thylakoid space, which is the area inside the thylakoid. All right, this is just another diagram showing that electron transport system. So the energy that's released as an electron is passed through, so it's passing through like this. It gets stored temporarily in a hydrogen ion concentration gradient across the thylakoid membrane. There are many more hydrogen ions in the thylakoid space than there are in the stroma. So in this hydrogen ion gradient, the energy will be used to generate ATP from ADP and the free phosphate groups. Okay, so again, as the electron is being passed down with each step, there's some energy being released. All right, step 3, so we are here now. When the events of step 1 and step 2 are taking place, light energy is absorbed by photosystem 1. Here is photosystem 1. Here's the light energy being absorbed. The energy is transferred to a reaction center. An electron is going to become excited again. There, the excited electron is passed to a high energy electron acceptor right up here. And in photosystem 1, the lost electron is replaced by an electron that has reached the end of the electron transport system from photosystem 2. Okay, and then step 4, where is right here, the electron that was received by the electron acceptor from photosystem 1 is used now to reduce NADPH. It's used to reduce NADP plus to form NADPH. So here we have NADPH forming, and this reducing power of NADPH will be used for the light-independent reactions. All right, making ATP, which is also referred to as chemiosmosis. So we talked about those hydrogen ions. Okay, and when the hydrogen ions are forced from the stroma to the thylakoid space, so here's the stroma, here's the thylakoid space, they cannot diffuse back across the membrane because the membrane is impermeable to these charged particles. So there's a special structure here called the ATP synthase, which is right here. And it's embedded in the thylakoid membrane, and it provides the only pathway for these hydrogen ions to move down their concentration gradient. All right, because there's much more hydrogen here than there is in the stroma. So a free phosphate group attaches to an ADP molecule right here to form ATP. And as the hydrogen ions move down their concentration gradient through this ATP synthase, the energy of the gradient is used to generate more ATP molecules. So this linking of the movement of hydrogen ions to the production of ATP, that is called chemiosmosis. All right, here it just says you can think of hydrogen ions passing through the ATP synthase as being like water passing through a dam. If it was in a dam, water turns a turbine, it generates electrical energy. So the movement of hydrogen ions through this ATP synthase is turning a molecular turbine that is basically generating ATP. All right, we'll watch this video in a sec. I'm just going to complete our lesson. So the light-dependent reactions, there's that electron transport chain. It exists in the thylakoid membrane, involves photosystem 1 and photosystem 2. So PS2 absorbs all wavelengths of light allowed by its pigments. When the light is absorbed, energy is transferred to a designated reaction center molecule. The reaction center becomes excited and an electron leaves to catch the electron transport chain, which we also called it as the electron transport system. PS2 oxidizes water molecules to provide electrons to replace the electrons that were leaving the photosystem. Oxygen is also produced at this step. It also provides hydrogen ions for the chemiosmosis. The electron from photosystem 2 travels down the electron transport chain. Every encounter with an electron-carrying molecule released some energy. That energy pushes hydrogen from the stroma into the thylakoid space. And therefore, that hydrogen ion concentration gradient was formed. That gradient will then be used to produce ATP from ADP and free phosphate groups. The electron from photosystem 2 then reached photosystem 1, or PS1. Light gets absorbed by the PS1. Energy gets passed on to the reaction center. A highly energized electron leaves photosystem 1. It's replaced by the electrons from PS2 at the end of its electron transport chain. The highly energized electron from PS1 moves down an electron transport chain. That electron then is used to reduce NADP plus to form NADPH. Both an electron and hydrogen ion are required for that process. Then, during chemiosmosis, the release of the electrons in the thylakoid membrane also caused a buildup of hydrogen ions. So during chemiosmosis, these excess hydrogen ions are used to produce ATP. So here we're looking at the ATP synthase, which is right here. ADP plus a free phosphate forms ATP. This is the thylakoid space in this diagram. This is the stroma. All right, so light-dependent reactions, they produce oxygen. It gets released from the chloroplasts to the atmosphere. They also produce intermediate products of NADPH and ATP, which are the molecules that are required in the light-independent reactions, where glucose will be produced. And just to summarize chemiosmosis one more time, this is the process by which ATP is generated through the movement of those hydrogen ions or protons down a concentration gradient. It occurs in both the chloroplast and the mitochondrion. Okay, so again, those hydrogen ions are building up in the thylakoid space. Once a hydrogen ion is in the thylakoid space, it can't diffuse back to the stroma. But there is that ATP synthase, which is embedded in the thylakoid membrane. It will move the hydrogen ions down the concentration gradient from high to low. High concentration is in the thylakoid space, low is in the stroma. So then ATP is created using the energy from this concentration gradient by the process called chemiosmosis. All right, so in summary, photosynthesis is a type of energy conversion. Plants make use of sunlight by converting solar energy into the chemical energy of food, which is glucose. There has to be light energy in order for photosynthesis to occur. There also has to be a way to harness light because light travels at many different wavelengths. So to account for this, plants contain many different pigments in their chloroplasts. Plants contain pigments such as chlorophyll that absorb various wavelengths of light, except for greens and yellows and some oranges. Once this light is absorbed, it's transferred to electrons that become highly excited and enter an electron transport chain. Production of oxygen happens when photosystem 2 oxidizes a water molecule. The oxidized water molecules provide electrons for the electron transport chain and hydrogen ions for chemiosmosis or ATP synthesis. Oxygen is a byproduct. It diffuses into the atmosphere. Photosystem 1 then reduces NADP positive to NADPH. So the light-dependent reactions rely on the reactions of water and light energy. These reactions produce the end product of oxygen and the intermediate products, ATP and NADPH. These will then be used in the light-independent reactions to produce glucose. All right, so we will look at that in the next lesson. So again, the photosynthesis is a series of reactions that are more complex than just this simple statement of carbon dioxide plus water plus energy produces glucose and oxygen. All right, so we'll look at light-independent reactions next class.